Thanks again for Shijak. I'd like to introduce our speakers from today's first session. Beny Rubinstein, he's the Chief Terra Partners from Terra. I'm going to read in Portuguese, guys. I'm sorry. It's in Portuguese. I'm not going to translate. I'm going to read in Portuguese. Grupo originário do Weizmann Institute of Science. I think, Beny, you can talk a little bit about Weizmann because it's so interesting. Of course, in the local Weizmann, you have to be at Weizmann to get all the experience at Weizmann. But hearing a little bit from you, from Weizmann, it's going to be very interesting. Trabalhando com governos e corporações globais em protocolos e testes de Covid. Ele trabalhou em desenvolvimento de negócios SaaS em startup no setor de clean tech. Ele também trabalhou na Microsoft, liderando vários projetos em vários países, com vários setores, falando de transformação digital, cobrindo Oriente Médio, Ásia, trabalhando com soluções em verticais de Artificial Intelligence, Machine Learning, trabalhou em setores como saúde, governo, varejo, manufatura, serviços financeiros. Ele está em Israel desde 2016, morando em Israel, e antes disso morou também 15 anos nos Estados Unidos. O Yova Barlev, he is the Strategic Partnership Manager at Startup Nation Central, a dual citizen of Israel and US with experience in planning and executing MNC's innovation strategy in Israeli tech companies. Always excited to tackle new challenges and bridge new relationships to help achieve companies' goals. So we have both of them. We start with Beny. So Beny, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Camila. Thanks, everyone, for the warm intro. When you read it, I realized I'm getting old because there's so many things. But I started to work when I was 16. So you do the math. I'm not that old yet, but I'm getting there. Let me perhaps share my screen. So what I am going to do today is slightly different than what I usually do. Because today, as you mentioned, I have sort of the luxury of having a co-presenter. And so I will let the experts talk about Israel. I want to share a little bit of my personal journey and experience. And as you mentioned, can you actually see my screen? I think my video just turned off. Yes? Okay. Yes. 1 second. A dual screen sometimes gives you a little bit of headache, but
it went off now, Beny.
Okay, let me try again. Share screen. Now you see the right screen, but the wrong slide. This is my family when we're still in Brazil. And there you go. Now you have me and the slide, so I won't touch anything else. Yeah, first of all, I'm gonna do most of the session in English. I've translated some slides to Portuguese because I had a different session yesterday. They asked me, but as you can see, artificial intelligence is now part of Office 365, which was one of my incubation projects back then in Microsoft. So you can see also simultaneous translation there. First of all, I'm very honored to be here. I've been in Israel, as you mentioned, since 2016, but before that, during all my time in Microsoft since 2001, I visited Israel at least once a year. Microsoft has an R&D center here in Herzliya, where I actually currently work, about a few miles away. And so I'll tell you a little bit about, my journey. I see that you're also meeting Michelle Abadi, which is a very good friend of mine after the session. Unfortunately, I won't be able to stay, but I think you're in very good hands also with Yoav, who has a lot of knowledge on the startup ecosystem. So my 30 or 40 minutes maximum will be basically centered around one topic. There's quite a lot of content, so I might go slightly fast. The point is not to actually make it a classroom, is to make it also interactive. So if you have questions and you want to ask them throughout the session, I'm okay with that if you want. The whole point here is to talk about something that I'm very passionate about. Since my young ages in Brazil, I was practicing judo, and as you may be able to see, I'm not a huge, very strong guy, but I was actually very successful in judo because I learned how to use the strength of my opponents towards me. And that's, I think, one of the main things that we see here in Israel. Here is just a couple thoughts for reflection before we even start. I won't read the slide here, but as you can see, if you really think about it, Israel has everything to go wrong, and thank God, knock on wood, it goes very well. We are a very tiny country. Unlike Brazil, there's not that much availability of natural resources, especially water. We have peace treaties with some of our neighbors, but not all of them. So we have, challenges, especially in the northern borders. So there is quite a lot. Well, the pandemic is not our exclusive problem, but also affected us. And at the end of the day, if you really think about it, all those challenges just made or even forced or compelled Israel to grow a lot stronger. And that's kind of the main theme. Again, I'll try just to touch upon a couple areas. One is my own search. I read his book, Men's Search for Meaning, a long time ago. I hear a lot of people love it. And so as an immigrant and a citizen of the world, I've been searching for certain things in life. And one of them was, the whole, what does innovation really look like, and how can we really become successful at it? So I'll talk a little bit from my perspective as a Brazilian American Israeli, how I see the chutzpah and the secret sauces, if you will, of Israel. But I'll talk also personally about the past year, very briefly. I mean, we all went through our own personal experiences this past year, and we all learned a lot, hopefully. I'll share just from my perspective, how I saw that happening in Israel from different angles, and not coincidentally, I'm now working on rapid screening solutions for COVID. And then I'll mention just one simple case study of what we mean disrupting the disruptive technologies. My career at Microsoft was not a standard career, meaning I never worked for Office or Windows because they're very big and successful groups. I was in groups that were less than 100 people at Microsoft, which started really from scratch. And now they are, very big groups, but, just bringing those new technologies, whether you are in a multinational or in a startup, it requires some specific things. And I wanted to share a little bit about that as well. So 30 years in 3 minutes. As you can see, I can speak very fast, so it won't last 30 years. Basically, I grew up in Rio. I always wanted to be a scientist. I studied at ORT, which is, I guess, not coincidentally, a sort of an Israeli / Russian technical school very known in Latin America. Started my whole career, very traditionally computer engineering. Worked for IBM, and then in '98, my love story with Israel started. I came to Israel as one of the first employees of Amdocs. Amdocs is a very large public company, Israeli American. They were just starting the operations in Latin America. So I was one of the first 10 or 12 employees. I ended up spending about half a year here in Israel, in Ra'anana, and then went back to Brazil to actually start building the operations of Amdocs there. In '99, I took my 2 suitcases again and moved to the US, went to business school, came back to Brazil for the summer, and ended up joining Microsoft for initially 3 to 5 years and stayed 13 years. So it was kind of like my bar mitzvah in Microsoft. And after 13 years, I said, maybe I miss home and maybe I want to give back some of my experience to my home country. I moved back. I founded a company together with Microsoft and Qualcomm and the government of Rio. We actually invested in many startups, both in Latin America and here in Israel. And in 2016, I was at that time married to an Israeli, had 2 kids, one born in the US, one born in Brazil, and said, well, if I ever get the luck of having a 3rd child, I'd love for him or her to be born in Israel. And I moved here in 2016, initially working as a sales leader for Microsoft in the Middle East and Africa. And then later on in 2019, I left Microsoft the 2nd time, took some time to explore life in startups, worked for a clean tech company at the north of the country. And then, at the mid of last year, I met the chairman and CEO of Terra, which is where I currently work, and started a new journey here. So again, out of all the things that I've done, I think that the most important thing is that I celebrate my mistakes. I think a lot of the results I got is because I made tons of mistakes. And if Michael Jordan can say that publicly, I'm certainly not embarrassed to say that. I actually write a lot about them and what I learned from them. And really, I think that's, if you really look at about Israel, this is the section that I will let Yoav deep dive and really talk you more about the startup ecosystem. But, just to give you an idea of size, I think some people who haven't been here, if you look at the map, that's the United States in yellow, that's Israel in blue. It's smaller than New Jersey. If you are looking at Brazilian standard, it's about the size of Sergipe. So it's really, really tiny. We hear a lot in the media about Israel, not always good things, unfortunately, but the amounts of news divided by square feet is definitely the highest in the world. So it's a very, very small country, about 9 million people, about 7 million Jews, 2 million Christians, Muslims, lots of other ethnicities. And then, the one thing that, Yoav will definitely deep dive into is the fact that we have one startup for every 1,600 people, roughly. It's a super interesting feeling to walk around here. There is a long list of rankings. I won't go into any of them, but Israel has always been placed as one of the most innovative countries in the world. And again, I think what we'll do here is not go through the typical points that I normally try to cover, which you have to elaborate on, but just talk a little bit about my own personal experiences. First of all, I don't know how many people know the story of the shark in the tank. Shall I? I'll try and tell the story very shortly. Supposedly it's a real story, but a very wealthy person enjoyed sushi and realized that it wasn't so tasty. He wanted actually to figure out how to get the best quality for his sushi. So one of his experts says, well, budget is not a problem. So why don't you just build a tank in our palace, and therefore you just choose the fish that he wants, we'll take it, and the chef will prepare your sushi very, very fresh. Turns out it didn't work out very well. He still was unhappy with the results. And after bringing all kinds of biologists and specialists, they realized that the issue was that the fish had a very easy life in the tank. They were fed, they had no challenges, no adversities. And eventually the meat was not so tender. So he got very angry and says, well, I invested a lot of money on that. So you got to find me a solution. And they said, yeah, we have a solution. We'll put a shark in your tank. Now he got really, really mad and said, well, you're telling me that you're going to put a shark in there. It's going to eat all my fish. I spent a lot of money on it. And I'm really angry that I have the best people in the world to give me this kind of advice. Long story short, they convinced him that it wasn't a joke, that the fact that the shark would be there, certainly probably 20 or 30% of the fish will be eaten by the hungry shark. However, the remaining 70% or so of the fish would be exactly how he wanted. They would be very active and their meat would be very, very tender. And since that day, they realized that having the shark in the tank would have a short-term loss, but would have a very impactful long-term gain. And that's not just a fable, but it's sort of the history of Israel. If you read Dan Senior and Saul Singer's book, I've had a chance to meet both of them in the U.S., and I'm sure you have read it as well. It tells you very much about the story of Israel from an angle of everything could go bad, but we did something about it, and it turned out that we found a solution somehow. The other point that I'll talk a little bit later is also the fact that nowadays I think we see a lot in social media everywhere, multinational corporations, governments, everybody talking about diversity and inclusion. I was at the Diversity and Inclusion Board at Microsoft for many years, representing Hispanics, Latinos, Brazilians, Jews, all kinds of ethnicities or minorities. But the reality is that the diversity is not that hard to get. The inclusion is a little bit harder. And Israel has to deal with it from day one. It's a country born in 1948 by immigrants, people coming from multiple countries, multiple languages, multiple cultures. And to date, if you walk around Israel, you see people who look like Yoav and I, maybe Polish, German, Russian, something like that, I'm guessing. And you see people from Ethiopia, people from Lebanon, people from lots of different countries. So it's definitely one factor that makes it more exciting and challenging, but gives us a lot more better outcomes. Miracles, I won't talk about it. Personally, I didn't grow up in a very religious family, but I started to study more Judaism, and I do agree with Albert Einstein, who says you can only live life in two ways: or you believe that nothing is a miracle, or you believe everything is a miracle. So I subscribe to the second chain. This is just a teaser. This is Messi, for those who don't know. Coming to Israel after he sort of intended to boycott Israel, and then eventually going to the Kotel, to the Western Wall to pray. It's supposed to be just a humor for my Argentinian friends, but I guess you get the point. Another topic that I think is fascinating, is the word chutzpah. If you read books, actually there is a book just published now by Guilherme Horn in Brazil, who works for Banco Votorantim, and many other books that talk about chutzpah. I won't try and give you the whole pitch. I think chutzpah is very hard to translate, but it would be considered more audacity, I guess, in English, or I would say in Portuguese more like cara de pau, talvez. But it's really like not being shy, not being afraid to ask weird questions, not be afraid to look stupid, because there are no stupid questions, only stupid answers. And this is just one example of a book that was published both in English and in Hebrew. Inbal Ariel is a very well-known person here in the Israeli ecosystem. She also has a lot of experience abroad. And she organized a focus group just with immigrants like myself, because we looked at her book and said, Inbal, all your experience from your childhood don't relate to us. We don't have Lag BaOmer in Rio. We don't burn wood when we are 7 years old. So all these things that you talk about are very Israeli-centric. And so we had some very interesting discussions on how to educate people from other cultures and get into that culture mode. A final book that you just mentioned, which again I met the author, and coincidentally her mother is from Brazil, although she doesn't speak Portuguese. This was not Lotman. She spent some time abroad in the U.S. and she was sharing with me how she has a background in psychology. She was very accomplished in Israel, and after moving to the U.S., she felt like something was off, and she wasn't so effective at work, or she wasn't connecting so well with people initially, and she decided to research it and publish a book that basically talks about how do you communicate in a more direct manner, such as some of the Nordic countries, how to get more results-oriented results. So it's another interesting book, and I'm happy to tell you more about it. So again, I'll do a very brief, probably 5 to 6 minutes only overview on COVID. I won't go through the details, a lot of stuff. But again, it's just another example. If you look at back 1 year, we've been through a journey. I mean, all of us have been, but I know that here in Israel, it was an interesting journey. There are some articles that talk about Startup Israel tackles the coronavirus with ingenuity and chutzpah. And the reason I put it there is, governments tend to be a little bit less nimble, or at least not so agile. And in my opinion, I won't get into politics, but I think we did probably several mistakes, but we made some very good just-in-time decisions, and took some calculated risks. And I think we are in a great shape from global standards. But it wasn't always easy. So again, I won't go through the details, but we started back in February last year. I was flying back from Moscow. I was keynoting a artificial intelligence conference, and I was literally on a plane with a lot of Russians and Chinese, half of them coughing, some with masks, some without masks. And I realized something was going to happen. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but I asked the stewardess for a mask. And as soon as I landed, I realized that I was not going to fly again for a while. But again, this is in a nutshell. Between March and April last year, this is how it all started. Very small numbers, and then we were up to about 800 new cases per day. By end of April, we were able to control it, so it was again down to around 100 new people sick per day, and it was sort of a good moment. In like a startup world, a roller coaster. You start feeling good about yourself. You celebrate. Wow, we're doing well. Some Danish company published a study and said Israel is the #1 place, and we became a case study of how to deal with COVID. Well, not too soon. After all the celebrations, we ended up in a very different situation. Back in July, when we were about to start our summer and go to the beach, we realized actually it's not going very, very well. We hit over 2,000 cases per day, which was double what the government set as a red flag. And at that point in time, there were all kinds of things happening, people protesting on the streets, changes in government, lots and lots of things. Eventually, the government appointed an expert, a czar for COVID, who started to take some different measures. Long story short, after many, many waves, we are now in June 2021, and we are in a much better situation. As Yoav was saying, we had our first live event yesterday for 100 people with no masks. I strongly recommend people to continue to wear masks, but thank God we are in a very privileged position with a combination of not just vaccinations, but lots of other things that were done throughout this period of time. It's not over yet, by the way, but we feel a lot better. So again, to summarize, three things that I believe are standard, both in the COVID story that I shortly told you and in everything else, is the fact that you have to have, as a principle, agility. And it means that you have to really, really be committed to the outcomes. And no matter how you're going to get there, you're going to find a way to get there, which means you need to be resilient. And the last thing sounds obvious, but it's not so obvious, is you have to collaborate, even with potential competitors, even with people that you couldn't imagine collaborating with. You have to find a way. So again, this is not novelty, but if you talk about job landscapes, I learned computer engineering and cloud and AI, and now we are revamping how artificial intelligence will work in the future. So everything's changing, and this is kind of just a few examples of how Israeli companies changed. And I'm not saying in years or months, I'm saying weeks or days. So many of the companies here, like Raphael, have been for decades implementing very process-centric routines in order to deal with the military needs and defense and so on. Here you see some examples of, for example, a factory that over a period of 2 days converted a plant for parts for tanks into a producer of medical equipment. So you can imagine the amount of transformation. We're not talking again about months or years, we're talking about hours and days. Similarly, we have very advanced technology for counterterrorism, so robots that would go and dismantle bombs so that we don't have casualties in the army were used to actually interface with positive COVID patients. So the list goes on and on, but again, I just wanted to illustrate to you how even in very non-innovative or non-agile spaces, by standard like military organizations or governments, Israel had to find a way to react and react very, very quickly. I'm not sure if I will show you this video because we don't have so much time, but this is basically just a summary of Terra, how I actually got here. Terra is a company that came from the Weizmann Institute of Science about 17 years ago. The Weizmann Institute is one of the leading organizations for life sciences, and it's amazing. I think it's worth a tour when you come here. They actually have a CEO for Latin America. If I'm not mistaken, I met him a while back.
Mario Fleck.
Mario Fleck. No, I know Mario Fleck very well. At that time was somebody else, was Danielson. Very good. So so even better. Anyways, the illustration of Terra is, I think, another example. Terra had been over 16 years working with 10 different industries, including food, energy, defense, using a very unique frequency called terahertz to do all kinds of applications. So for example, on the food industry, we have an application called TeraEgg, where you can scan an egg, a chicken egg, in the first day and determine whether it's going to be a male or female, if it's going to be able to reproduce it or not. So if it will be able to reproduce, you can send it to an incubator for 21 days. And if you want, then you can sell it, in a supermarket for to avoid basically, wasting billions of dollars and billions of lives of animals that eventually get slaughtered because they can't reproduce. So Terra, about a year ago, met with the Minister of Defense in Israel. And when this whole thing started here last summer, we decided that we could repurpose the same technology that scans eggs and water and all kind of molecules to scan breath. And so basically you have a little tube plastic like this that you blow into. We collect some volatile organic compounds, and we're able within 5 minutes to use the system to detect the biospectral fingerprints of your breath. And in there, you can actually do a very quick analysis to clear healthy people, meaning if you're in an airport or going to a stadium, soccer, football game, you can clear the 95% or so of people who are not infected by SARS-CoV-2. And for the ones that you suspect that might be, you can send them to a secondary test, a PCR, whatever it is. But you can already filter and do very high throughput for this kind of scanning, mass screening. So again, there's lots and lots of stories. I won't bother you with that. This is another example of an Israeli company that I brought into a conference in Slovakia right before the COVID. Kira worked with me at Microsoft Research, and she has a company called Diagnostic Robotics that has also revolutionized how we deal with just-in-time data. So you can actually decide city by city or neighborhood by neighborhood whether you should do a lockdown or not. So very, very unique population health artificial intelligence systems, which were used last year here in Israel as well. Again, just to summarize, there's quite a lot in there, but my point is there's no black or white answer, right? So there is always a struggle between more controls, more surveillance, and safety and health and privacy. It's an endless battle. We actually are working with many governments and corporations in order to define what we call the biosafety standards moving forward. We believe people will have to be screened like in 9/11. You had to remove your shoes and empty your bottles of water in the airport. I'm still doing that 20 years later, and we think that people will have to have some sort of screening, probably not just for COVID, but for other diseases as well moving forward. This is not the first pandemic, just so people remember, we had at least 2 of them in the last 20 years. So again, the point here again on collaboration, I wanted just to make a point, again, not to be political, but when I joined Microsoft Middle East and Africa, I had to remove everything I had in social media about Israel. I had to get a phone number from Turkey. I had to do all kinds of possible things in order to be able to work in the United Arab Emirates. We are very blessed to have signed an agreement with the UAE. We are on the way to do that with Bahrain, with many others. I think that it was an amazing accomplishment of the past government. The picture that you see there on the right is actually Terra's chairman and CEO was the first Israeli company to sign a strategic agreement in Abu Dhabi. Actually, the first day of the agreement, we were there signing an agreement. And again, this is just one out of many examples when you have to be very agile and open-minded in order to find the best solutions for global challenges and not just national interests. The reason I have this slide here is also to show, this is a much different level. The job market in Israel was very affected by COVID. We typically had 5% or less unemployment rate for the past 5-7 years. Just 2 months after COVID hit, we had about 1 million unemployed people in a country of 9 million. So you do the math, it's over 25%. This is over a couple weeks, maybe a month or 2. So what people did is, because you go to websites, you don't know who's hiring, who's not hiring, who's on freeze, who's on layoff and whatever. People actually got together, a venture capital firm with a lot of people, and said, let's put a live spreadsheet where everybody who knows that their company can still hire or knows of a job or their neighbor or their father or whoever is hiring can upload that in real time. And this is like one of the examples of how this thing was also put together in a few days. It got amazing traction, and even people who were in the market for a job said, rather than hold it to my chest and hide it from other people because they'll compete with me, they just said, let's put it all out there. Eventually, we're all going to be better off. And that's, again, another example of how a community can help each other, even if there's some potential conflict of interest or competition, and just another example of collaboration. There's many others that I won't touch. I mean, we have companies also researching vaccines, tests. We collaborate with many companies worldwide. And again, we know there's not going to be one solution for the entire globe. No Pfizer or no JSK is going to solve all the problems of humanity. So we are working with pharmaceutical companies, governments, academic institutions, everywhere in the world, and really just trying to find the best solutions for the global challenges. Again, this is another example. I will probably just skip for the sake of time. But again, outside of all the politics and the conflicts and things that probably are unfortunately more predominant in the social media, we as any other country has our own internal differences. It's a democratic country. We have a new government formed. There's all kinds of opinions out there, and they're all welcome. We also had to focus along this time in terms of, despite all the differences, really focus on the really important causes. So whether it's to fight the COVID pandemic, whether it was to fight terrorism, we had to unite, and we had to very quickly forget our small differences and disagreements, and make sure that we could go to battle for the collective good. So that's again another very important matter. I won't go through this slide, but I just wanted to illustrate to you again another break of paradigms when half of the world still thinking about how to implement cloud and AI and machine learning. I'm a bit biased because I was one of the first 6 people in Microsoft doing that. So it was 13 years ago. And one of the things that one of the companies that I am an advisor for, what they're doing now is they're reversing that whole model and saying, look, rather than having a bunch of smart data scientists building models and trying to optimize things, why don't we use technology to automate that? So what they did is they used genetic algorithms, which have been in existence for about 100 years, but utilizing some very specific, unique capabilities. They realized that, the traditional model of artificial intelligence is based on some premises. So I will do a predictive maintenance solution for Boeing, as I did with Microsoft, based on some hypotheses, some models, and even with machine learning, the system will eventually improve itself. But that's also based on my limited and biased view of the world, right? If something happens drastically, I probably don't have enough data scientists to go and try and rebuild that model, improve that model day overnight. They're probably busy doing other things. So what they do, for example, is this is just a simulation of how they operate with many medical companies and so on. We don't know how to reproduce the Mona Lisa. We could try and spend a lot of time figuring out what's the best model to copy the Mona Lisa, but we actually don't know. So what they do here is they launch thousands of models. They don't know which one will perform better, and they use Darwin. So basically, at some point, the system will self-select, working 24/7, which of the models are performing better. And with a very high accuracy, you can actually recreate the Mona Lisa, although you actually don't know how to get there, but you know where you want to get, and you know how to compare performance. So again, a very simple illustration of disrupting artificial intelligence, kind of turning upside down these pyramids and figuring out that maybe we don't know all the answers, maybe we don't have all the processes figured out, but we can use competition to actually self-select the best models. So yeah, again, I think I want to leave some time for questions. What I wanted to bring back, this is a slide that was used at Microsoft several years ago when we changed the CEO. Satya Nadella came in and really had to reinvent Microsoft. Microsoft was obviously a very successful company. Over a decade I was there, and the stock was basically stuck. And as you can see today, it's a different company. And the reason is we had to actually change our mindset and realize, Microsoft was not born in the cloud like Google or Amazon. And we had, a lot of legacy, which brought us a lot of revenue and profit. But we had to actually rethink about the world in a different way. And that was not just a technological change. People think innovation is just bringing new technologies, but it's really changing your own mindset and stop thinking that, this is this should be, and I'm frustrated because, it's no longer that way. And really try to think how the challenges that I'm facing now are going to help me grow, how I'm going to be able to make things better and different. And so I have many articles that I write. Those are all available. There's, of course, no cost. There is a publication that I recommend you to check, especially because it's a Portuguese audience. Revista Brasil. I contribute with an innovation section there. And my last section was published in June, was talking exactly about how the Startup Nation is basically mastering how to manage a crisis. And that's probably one of the things that we learned how to master. I think that's basically it. Again, there's some things that I learned, but I would summarize just in three main things. When I was back, in high school, I was very good student, and I was first in class, and I was getting scholarships. And somebody told me once, look, IQ is not necessarily the thing that will get you, the highest success in life. You need to work on your emotional skills. And I started to read all the books from Daniel Goleman and realized that, yeah, you need to know how to have soft skills and interact with people if you succeed. But then again, the third wave came, and the World Economic Forum just published all these new reports saying, doesn't matter how good you are today, your IQ, your EQ, if you're not adaptable, you're going to be dead in 5-10 years. So again, I think we now need to work on the third axis, which is how do we learn that even if you became a master in something, that you may need to reinvent yourself again over the next few years. And again, that's part of what Israel has been doing. The second lesson is probably the one that resonates more with my life, which was when we introduced technologies for cloud in Microsoft. Basically, most people thought about it as a stage. So I've been doing this insurance process manually for a while. I'm going to digitalize it, and now I'm going to have maybe a more efficient version of that. That's a great improvement. It's not necessarily something new that you do. You just do something that you've been doing for a long time in a slightly more efficient way. So when we actually worked with the University of Washington, they told us about some study in genetics that would take them 2 years to conclude, and millions of dollars, and they have no way to do it. And then we said, well, how about we do it using the cloud? And we basically started to look at things that they thought were not possible to do, but now we will be able to do that. And again, that's the change in the mindset, which is sometimes we just think about improving what we do, but we're still doing the same things over and over. And sometimes we need to maybe step back and think, what are the things that I could never do that would actually have a great impact? And then really think about how to get there. And that's the most impactful innovation. And again, you may be searching for a path that doesn't succeed. It happens often and often, but sometimes on the path, you need to be very alert to the cues and learn along the lines and make the adjustments. So eventually you may take a different path. If you all watched Alice in País das Maravilhas, you will remember that if you don't know where you want to go, you can take right or left, doesn't matter. But if you know where you want to go and you take the wrong door, you can always come back and take a different door. So that's probably the main insights. I don't know that I don't think we have time for the video, but I can send you this link. I think this is a video that was built by SodaStream, a company that was acquired by Pepsi here in Israel for billions of dollars. And it just shows how the whole thing about diversity is real. We have Bedouins, Muslims, Palestinians, Israelis, everybody working as a team. And it's a very touchy movie. I wish that was more prominent in the media. But again, it just shows that, despite all the challenges, when we embrace the differences and we embrace the challenges, we're able to achieve amazing results. So the stream was sold for billions of dollars to Pepsi Cola just a few years ago. And I think that's basically it. Again, I don't want to get into politics here, but we've seen around the world how leaders have reacted to this past year. And the reality is we need to always make a choice whether we'll blame the past and the difficulties, or whether we'll agree to disagree sometimes and just move forward with a common goal. And that's part of what I learned with Adam Grant, who's a professor also at Wharton, where I studied, and has some interesting books called Give and Take. That's it. My main suggestion is take calculated risks. Calculated is the key word here. You calculate your risk, but you take the risk. I think that's about it. So this is all I had to share, and I wanted to thank you and open for any questions.
Great. Thank you, Beny. I think you have a hard stop in some minutes, right?
Yeah, I have to go in about 9 minutes, but I can take 10 minutes. Yeah.
Great. Go ahead, Carlos.
Hey, Beny, there's one thing that really intrigues me about Israel. Why is Israel so developed for software and consequently for AI? It's what was really the reason or the leverage that make Israel get to this situation?
Yeah, so I left some slides out intentionally because I think Yoav will cover them, but I'll give you my 3 cents there. First of all, there's 4 main reasons for that. One is, back to the adversity thing, that is it's not the only reason, but one of the reasons why Israel has such strong technologies, including AI, including cybersecurity, for example, is just the military needs, right? Israel would not exist today if we didn't have very advanced technology. So it's not optional; it's mandatory. To give you an example, concrete example, when I was CEO of Acelera Partners in Brazil, I invested in a company here in Israel called Taranis. Taranis, CEO of FIR, is now in Silicon Valley. They have actually large operations in Brazil. He and I met when he had just, a PowerPoint and was looking for some seed investment. And he said, look, I was a pilot at the Air Force in Israel. And because of the national security, I mean, if you think about the size again of Israel, the fact that, the missiles from Hamas were sent from Gaza, which is about 80 kilometers from Tel Aviv. I think about the distances, it's actually very, very short distance. So, same with the northern border in Lebanon with Hezbollah. So he had actually technology that the army had developed to actually, from the flight, to actually map out the battlefield and make sure that they could actually succeed in any military conflicts. And he said, "Look, I think if I can map out, Lebanon from far away, I could probably map out a plantation and use artificial intelligence just to predict possible outcomes due to if I need to use pesticides, if there's going to be any major meteorological changes, etc." So I don't know if I answered your question, but again, the need of collecting information, processing that, making quick decisions, it's a matter of survival here. And there is quite a lot of investment on that, of course. It doesn't happen magically. It's not that people here have any higher IQ than anybody else. It's just that the culture, the mindset, as well as the investments you have. I will probably show you the GDP per capita and all kinds of metrics here in Israel. There is a very large amount of investments, both by government and by private investors in technology, in innovation, in R&D. So that's one of the reasons.
I'll also be happy to elaborate on that, Carlos. In my slides, I think the fifth slide will cover that as well.
Great. Anyone have any other question to Beny? We are going to touch a lot of as you've mentioned, about the Israeli ecosystem as well. Beny, I just would like to hear your opinion about what makes Israeli ecosystem very unique.
Yeah, again, I think I would say in one word, it's both the diversity as well as the culture. What I mean by that is, as I said, diversity is not just ethnicities and all kinds of things which we talked about, but even if you look at again, Yoav will probably cover that in depth, but if you look at Israel has some stigmas like you're very good in cyber, you're very good in this, which is true. But if you actually look at all the areas that we invest in research, etc., it spans like multiple industries, multiple technologies, etc. Artificial intelligence became one of the strongest areas here, as well as in China. We do a lot of it, not just in startups, but also all the R&D for not all, but most of R&D for Facebook, for Microsoft, for Amazon. It's actually here in Israel. But again, there is a huge variety. There's people coming from all over the world with PhDs in so many different universities, in so many fields that kind of, there is a constant, there is not a search for consensus here. I've worked a lot of Asian countries and have deep respect for the culture, and they're very advanced. But here it's kind of the opposite in the sense that nobody's looking for consensus. I read a Harvard Business Review article this week that says why people should disagree more at work. And we disagree. I had a 2.5-hour meeting this morning. If you're coming from Brazil and you land here, you think, wow, this company is going to collapse. People are screaming at each other. But actually, we're having a great meeting. We're like debating not personal issues, we're debating opinions and procedures. And we were able to make drastic decisions, and we're executing them just in a couple hours. But again, it's not being fearful of being wrong. We really we don't have also a lot of hierarchy. You see two people talking to each other. One might be the 1 month intern who just started, and one might be the CEO who's been here for 20 years. And they may be debating. You may not be able to tell the difference in layers or anything, just because every opinion is an opinion. Of course, you need to substantiate that with data. It's not just your personal opinion. But at the end of the day, we're not searching necessarily for consensus. We're searching for some healthy competition. And then once a decision is made, then we tend to use the Jeff Bezos principle of the disagree and embrace. So you disagree until some point when you actually agree. Then you go and you execute it, and again you execute with a lot of resilience. You don't say, oh, that's too hard, that's not going to work. You just go and go and go and go, and you take the punches and you get up, and eventually you get there.
Thank you so much, Beny. I don't want to jump into your time here, so thank you so much for joining us for the session. I think we can share your contact right with the delegation, and you share everybody's contact with you as well. So thank you so much. We will be more than happy to connect. We will be back in Israel in person as soon as things get better and we're able to travel again. Definitely was one mission to come back. People are very anxious about it. We will, and we hope to connect you in person in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing you all here, and Yoav and I will think about a great way to host. I'm a bit biased. I like the whiskey bar, but we can choose a different place if you want.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. I'll turn